Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th Canto, Chapter 1, entitled The Advent of Lord Krishna, Introduction. Text 40. Vrajam stistan padakena yattaivakena gacchati yatatrina jalokaivam dehi karma gatim gata. Translation. Just as a person traveling on the road rests one foot on the ground and then lifts the other, or as a worm on a vegetable transfers itself to one leaf and then gives up the previous one, the conditioned soul takes shelter of another body and then gives up the one he had before. Purport. This is the process of the soul's transmigration from one body to another. At the time of death, according to his mental condition, the living being is carried by the subtle body consisting of mind, intelligence, and ego to another gross body. When higher authorities have decided what kind of gross body the living entity will have, he is forced to enter such a body, and thus he automatically gives up his previous body. Dull-minded persons who do not have the intelligence to understand this process of transmigration take for granted that when the gross body is finished, one's life is finished forever. Such persons have no brains with which to understand the process of transmigration. At the present moment, there is a great opposition to the Hare Krishna movement, which is being called a brainwashing movement. But actually, the so-called scientists, philosophers, and other leaders in the Western countries have no brains at all. The Hare Krishna movement is trying to elevate such foolish persons by enlightening their intelligence so that they will take advantage of the human body. Unfortunately, being of gross ignorance, they regard the Hare Krishna movement as a brainwashing movement. They do not know that without God consciousness, one is forced to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Because of their devilish brains, they will next be forced to accept an abominable life and practically never be able to liberate themselves from the conditional life of material existence. How this transmigration of the soul takes place is very clearly explained in this verse. Umakyantimarandasya ginanjana shalakaya chakshurum militam yena tasmai shri gurave namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatan Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakampitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinobandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanjana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Vanshakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubheva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasade Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So beg for the blessings of the assembled devotees. Adi Purush Prabhu asks for your blessings. We may say something for the pleasure of Shishi Radha Mulidhar. May our words be aligned with Guru Parampara, and may all the devotees be benefited by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. So again, this is Canto 10, Chapter 1, which is entitled The Advent of Lord Krishna, Introduction. Text 40. Just as a person traveling on the road rests one foot on the ground and then lifts the other, or as a worm on a vegetable transfers itself to one leaf and then gives up the previous one, the conditioned soul takes shelter of another body and then gives up the one he had before. So Parikshit Maharaj eagerly requested Shukadev Goswami to speak more about Sri Krishna, to speak about his birth, his activities, his qualities. And he mentions how relishable it is to hear about Krishna. But he also gives the adhikar, the qualification to relish. Many books of our acharyas, they begin with first giving the adhikar, the qualification to actually enter the book and to truly understand and to truly relish the book. So Parikshit, I believe it's the 4th verse of this chapter, he gives this term that gives us entrance into relishing the pastimes of the Lord. He says, Nivrita Trishna, which means when a person is no longer interested or thirsting for mundane goals or advantages. When that is finished in a person's life, that thirst is no longer there, then they can actually relish hearing about Krishna, Krishna's pastimes, Krishna's birth, as we're about to hear. So Krishna is always drawing us in, but we're anchored in this material world with so many attachments. So those strong attachments to the material world is like an anchor, a boat, to lift the boat out of the water when the boat is anchored in the water. It's not easy. But when we have our own insight, realization to lift those anchors, to let go, and then we'll find ourselves spontaneously being drawn to Krishna in Krishna's pastimes. The example is given of the fisherman. How does the fisherman catch fish? First, he throws some bait out into the water, and many fish will come because of that, right? You're throwing food out there and all the fish start to assemble. And then on his hook, he puts one piece of bait and then he throws his line out there into the water. And some of the fish come around the hook, but they don't bite it. They go away. But one fish will bite that hook and get caught. So who's the fisherman? The fisherman is Krishna. And who's that fish that takes the bait from the hook? That's us, actually, because somehow we've taken this Krishna consciousness. It's affected us in some way, impacted us, and we want it. So what happens at that point is that the fisherman doesn't start reeling in the fish immediately. He actually gives more room to the fish to swim around. So even though he's caught this fish, the fisherman gives more room And what does that cause? Then the fish starts to move left, right, and around, going back and forth, trying to release itself. And if it goes on for a long time in that way, it starts to get exhausted. And when the fisherman feels that there's no more struggle, then it's very easy for him to reel in that fish. So in the same way, we get caught by Krishna. Some fish don't, some just go away, but somehow we're interested. But we're still restless. We're still running around everywhere. Even in devotional life, I'm going to do this for Krishna. I'm going to do that for Krishna. I'm going to go here, go there. And we're running and we're running, we're busy. And then the realization can come at some point of what surrender really means. To really surrender, to lose that faith, to lose that interest in just material ambition, because we can bring all of that into spiritual life as well. We could be doing devotional service for those reasons. But finally, when we see through that, we see there's nothing there. Actually, I'm just meant to serve Krishna. And we become more still internally. We're very active still externally because we're performing service, but a certain insight has come now. We become more tranquil, joyfully, and we let go. Oh, it's all about Krishna. This is what surrender to Krishna means, to let go of all of those selfish desires, concerns, worries, and to surrender. And so, forgive me for the example of the fisherman, but this example is given sometimes. We're not into catching fish, but it's a good example because Krishna will allow us to run ourselves around, run ourselves out, so to speak. And then we start to understand what surrender means. And then very easily we are drawn into Krishna. Krishna draws us in. So it's very easy for him to now reel in that fish. So therefore, Nivrita Trishna, Parikshit says, when this finally happens, when one is no longer interested in material ambitions and goals and advantages and favors, then they'll be able to relish, take shelter of and relish the pastimes of the Lord. So Shukadev Goswami here, he's speaking about the advent of Krishna, and he begins with the story of the father and mother of Krishna. This is where he begins, Vasudeva and Devaki. And it's described here in this chapter. After their marriage, Devaki's father, out of affection for his daughter, he gave a very generous dowry along with his blessings. And then Vasudeva mounted his chariot to return home with his new wife. And to please his sister, Kamsa, he took the reins of that chariot to escort them both back to the home of Vasudeva. This was the custom. And as they departed, an unembodied voice came from the sky and announced, Kamsa, you fool, you're driving the chariot of your sister, even though her 8th child will be the cause of your death. You are such a fool. And so Kamsa, when he heard that, just immediately, impulsively, he just grabbed the hair of his own sister, Devaki, and he took out his sword to kill her. Right there. This is immediate reaction. And Vasudeva was shocked, of course, but he was also very composed. And he very swiftly became tactful in diplomacy, somehow or other, how to stop this. And he tried different ways. And this is a nice section to hear his methods. First, he tried to evoke Kamsa's sense of reputation. He said, Kamsa, you're the pride of the Bhoja dynasty. Heroes praise you. They praise your qualities. How could you perform such an ignoble act to your own sister, killing your sister on the occasion of her marriage? You see, so he tried to invoke his reputation. You're glorified. You're the pride of the Bhoja dynasty. Don't do this. He tried that first. And then he tried to appeal to his reasoning and also his fear of the consequences. Right? That's also a tactic. Fear. It's not often so effective anymore on people. But this verse is connected to that idea, right? Vasudeva is saying, the soul is transmigrating from one body to another according to what's mentioned in this verse, karma gatim, the karmic destination. And you'll be forced into a worse situation in your next life if you do such a heinous act. So Prabhupada points out in the purport that where Krishna consciousness movement is accused of brainwashing. But the people who are accusing in that way have no brains at all, Prabhupada says, because they don't understand this very important science. The science of the transmigration of the soul from one body to the next. What determines where you go next is the consciousness that you're cultivating in this life. What science is more important than that? So it's called brainwashing. But as far as Prabhupada is concerned in this purport, he says there are actually no brains at all in most people. We should learn this. We should hear this. We should understand it. And this verse is showing us just how seamless this process is. Right? I'll read it again. The example shows the seamlessness of this process. Just as a person traveling on the road rests one foot on the ground and then lifts the other, or as a worm on a vegetable transfers itself to one leaf and then gives up the previous one, the conditioned soul takes shelter of another body and then gives up the one he had before. There's a similar verse in the 4th canto, where the example of the caterpillar. The caterpillar is moving from one leaf to the next, but it's still on one leaf as it starts to move to the next. And finally, when it's secure on the next leaf, it lets go of the first leaf. In this way, from what that means is, unless we're doing something about it, our next material body is already being built right now in this life. It's already happening. It's like the blueprint is already being established in our subtle body. As the time factor just goes on, flows on, then it's mentioned the aprarabdha karma. There's unmanifest karma already stored within the subtle body. And as time flows on, it begins to produce external results. So that means that even while we're living in this life, in this body, we're doing certain things, reactions return into they enter back into us, the reaction, and it's stored as an unmanifest karma. And as time goes on, it starts to manifest. And that means another body is beginning to also be built in this life. The subtle karma begins to grossify. Now, if we can see that this is what's happening, if we can see and understand how this happens and how I'm doing this, we hear about it in the Shastra, but we also need to really reflect and also observe ourselves. How is this actually happening? Is this really happening with me? Where I'm, just by living and acting, thinking and feeling, I'm actually creating another body. It's forming. We have to observe ourselves. We have to, spy on ourselves, watch, self-observation, to observe how this process works. It's given to us in the scriptures, but how is it actually working? So I want to paint a little picture from my research into the Shastra of what's actually happening, so we can kind of see clearly how this process works. So there's the chitta, the consciousness. And within this chitta, there are countless samskars. Countless. We're not experiencing all of them right now. We just have a small little bundle of samskars we're experiencing. We had so many lives with so many different experiences, but we're not identifying with those right now. They're not active, but they're still there, those samskars, those impressions. And it's the false ego that limits the samskars that we're experiencing right now in this one life, right? Here I am in this one life. And therefore my false ego is what? I'm Italian, I'm American, I'm from this place, this is my family, these are my likes and dislikes, these are my inclinations. So the total self is much bigger than all of this, but the false ego limits it into this one present life, and we identify with all of those things, right? And so certain things I'm identified with, and other things within my consciousness are rising up, like certain thoughts rise up, certain inclinations, certain likes and dislikes, certain desires are rising up, and I identify with all of it as me. I identify with all of that as me, and therefore I act on them. I act on it all. No, this is my desire, right? So now I want to go and fulfill it. And as soon as you act on it, then there are reactions. You're creating more impressions and more reactions that are fed back in to the chitta, to the total consciousness. And if we really can observe that this is what's happening, we'll see why it is that we're caught in this loop, in this cycle. This is the inner samsara. There's an outer samsara, right? Like the material world of birth and death, coming again and again. Prabhupada would often say, bhutva bhutva praliyate. Again and again, the creation itself is coming and going, coming and going. But that's taking place because inside of us, we also, on a small scale, we have the same process that's going on of these deep-rooted samskars that rise up, and then they take the form of desires. And then I identify with those. I act them out, and that brings the reaction back in. And this way, it's just going round and round and round. It's fed back into us, into our consciousness. So this is the Bhagavad. This information is amazing because it's showing us, but we also need the realization of it. But it's showing us, at least we can now understand the workings of the subtle body and why it is that I'm caught in the cycle. It's identification. That's the main issue. Identification with the thoughts, with the mind, because the identification is so strong. I feel like it's me. I have to do. Oh, these are my likes. These are my dislikes. I'm identified so strongly with it all. And by carrying it out, I keep feeding it. I keep it in existence, this cycle. Now, so this is the inner samskar. Therefore, Prabhupada in the purport, he's saying that it is foolish to think at the end of this life, all is finished. Actually, we're caught in a loop. It continues. We keep feeding this. So how, right? This is the question. Then how do we break this cycle? This loop, this closed circle actually has to become something like a spiral, an upward spiral. You know, a closed circle just goes round and round and round. There's no progress. But a spiral that's going up, it's still going round and round, but it's starting to rise up. So there's a nice verse I wanted to read. It's from the Bhagavad-Gita. I actually have it on my phone here. I'm using my phone today because my computer was slow. But let me just bear with me for a moment. I want to get this verse and read it to you. Okay, this is from second chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, text 70. So just listen carefully after everything that was said, so we can kind of catch what needs to be done. So this is a famous verse, chapter 2, text 70. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So the incessant flow of desires are coming up from the subconscious, coming into our awareness, and we're identified and we act it all out. So somehow that has to stop. How does that stop? It's by chanting the name of Krishna. Because what happens when you chant? Think about it. You sit down and you try to become still and you begin your chanting. And what happens? What rushes in? Thoughts, desires, distractions. It's all rising up as you sit down and just try to chant. You're just trying to hear the name Krishna. But all this is rising up. So to chant means to commit ourselves again and again to just attentively hearing the sound Krishna. And those things will continue to rise up. But we have to be a little separate from it, knowing that it's not the true me. Just look at this happening. Look at my mind going wild. You know, you try to just sit in silence for a few moments, and then you'll see what the problem is, why we're caught in this inner cycle. And imagine if you don't practice this all day long, this is happening. Every thought that comes up, we're identified with it. Every feeling, we're identified with it. And the identification is like the glue, you know, it glues us to material existence. So the practice of chanting, we should see clearly what we're doing when we chant. All of that is going on, but I'm beginning to separate. I'm beginning to gain the skill to just attentively and nicely hear the sound of Krishna's name. We're starting to rise above all of that, the rushing in of the subtle body that's demanding to be acknowledged. If we stop acknowledging it and we just start to turn our attention to the sound Krishna, to the name, the holy name, because we become more still inside of ourselves. And when you actually hear the name Krishna, you're in contact with Krishna. And by his grace, we're actually overcoming. And those desires will always still come up, but we'll see them as actually not coming from my true self. And we'll start to have a power to not just give in to everything. And this is why the chanting is the key actually to everything. Because you're actually gonna, if it's, you know, two things are happening when you chant. You're trying to separate from all the distractive mind, the mind with all its distractions and desires and thoughts. you're separating a little bit from that, right? The Bhagavatam also speaks of this, about being the Sakshit Vena, being the witness. Like I said earlier about we're spying on ourselves. We're witnessing what's actually going on in ourselves. When you do that, you're a little bit out of that grip of all the thoughts, right? So when you sit down to chant every day, what does chanting mean? It's like we keep the distracted mind and we just try to keep chanting. We just repeat the name, and all that activity is still happening within our minds. But the practice is to just keep returning to the sound. Keep returning to the sound, Krishna. And it's a practice. It actually becomes easier with time. But we have to see what we're doing and why, right? Distracted chanting can kind of go on forever because it's habitual. We're always distracted. This is actually how we are throughout the whole day. Everything that we see, or suddenly our minds go in that direction, or something comes up from within to the surface awareness, and then I'm into that. And then this is happening in the world and I'm absorbed in that. This person just said this to me and therefore this is my reaction. We're just at the mercy of everything happening around us. So chanting, finally you have a moment to sit down and watch all that happening and to let go of the identification a little bit and come back to the name of Krishna. And from that, when we actually can attentively hear the name Krishna, we're contacting Krishna. And he's clearing out all of these tendencies in a sense. He's giving us the power because we're experiencing something so much more pure and real, that Krishna is giving us the realization that the mind and the activities of the mind, this is all not coming from my soul. This is my conditioning that's rising up. So I'll end with one more verse and then we'll open it up. And this verse is usually not used in connection with chanting, but try to hear it in that way and you'll see there's many nice insights of what it means, how we're supposed to chant. This verse is from Bhishma Dev. Yesterday was Bhishmastami. And I just want to read this verse, this glorification of Bhishma, and think of it in terms of chanting because it gives us a clue. So this is Canto 1, Chapter 9, Text 30. Thereupon that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men stopped speaking, and being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, who stood before him four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined. And I'll just read a little part of the purport. In the momentous hour of leaving his material body, Bhishma Dev set the glorious example concerning the important function of the human form of life. The subject matter which attracts the dying man becomes the beginning of his next life. Therefore, if one is absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, he is sure to go back to Godhead without any doubt. So this example of Bhishma is nice because he let go of everything. Think of chanting, right? He was identified as a warrior. He fought in so many battles. He spoke on so many subjects. But now at this important moment, he just fixed his mind on Krishna, the beautiful form of Krishna, with complete concentration, and gave up his body. So when we chant, we also have to let go of our identification, who I think I am, the thoughts, the feelings, everything coming into the mind. Let it go for a little while and just try to hear nicely the sound of Krishna. And you'll get distracted again. You'll find yourself very quickly back into a thought, back into a whole story, back into the future. You go into the future of what's going to happen, what you have to do for the rest of the day. This is all, this is the problem. this inner samsara, it feeds the cycle. The inner cycle feeds the outer cycle, and therefore there's repeated, as this verse is describing, repeated birth and death. Even in this life, we're creating our next body already because of identification. So what is the exit out of this closed circle? It's chanting the name of God. And this is actually true of all spiritual traditions. Every tradition has this practice of repetition of the name of God, actually, but it's been lost mostly. There are different, I did a little study on this once, maybe some presentation sometime, but showing how the chanting of the name, in Buddhism, there's a practice called Nembutsu. Nem is coming from the word Nam. It's the glorification of the name, and you're meant to actually just repeat a prayer over and over again. In Christianity, this is sometimes called the Jesus prayer. And there are different variations, but the practice was to say, Jesus, have mercy on me. And you just repeat that, Jesus, have mercy on me. Jesus, have mercy on me. This was done in Mount Athos. It's an island in Greece where all monks live. And there was a whole movement that was started. And what was said, to summarize the whole movement, is that God and his name are identical. This is how it was put. And this created controversy within the church, the Orthodox Church, because some people couldn't understood how this could actually be a true method. They weren't familiar with it, but it has a history. In Islam as well, the Sufi tradition, they have this chanting, La ilaha illallah, which is the repetition of Allah. In Judaism, they say that the whole Torah, there's a verse that the whole Torah is coming from the name of God, Yahweh, which they don't pronounce sometimes because they think it's so holy it shouldn't be spoken. We say the exact opposite. It's so holy that we should speak it always. But still, there's a reverence for the name and how everything is contained in the name. So every tradition has this, but it's been lost through the years because there's usually not a bona fide parampara system. Or there's not a parampara system at all. There's not a passing down of guru-disciple. There was originally, but some of those have been broken. And so therefore, that kind of method has been lost a little bit, but it's been kept very alive in our tradition. And again, Lord Chaitanya, coming 500 years ago, just again re-emphasized, this is everything. This is the way. This is the way to overcome material existence. It's just by hearing the sound Krishna, and from hearing the sound Krishna, the name, then the form is revealed, the qualities, the activities, and the attraction will spontaneously arise in our hearts. So I'll stop here and open it up if there are any thoughts, comments, questions. Hare Krishna.
Shikshashtakam Prabhu, Athena, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, I will forgive you for your analogy of the fisherman. I won't tell PETA.
Okay, thank you.
But I just had a question about a seeming contradiction in the philosophy. You say that we should become free from all desires by chanting the holy name and just concentrate on that. That's the principle of surrender. And my mind is always going everywhere, all the time. Even you said about devotees, say, I want to do this for Krishna. I want to preach this way. I want to do this way. And all these desires are coming up in the mind because it's, we're not listening to Krishna. So my question is, why that? I mean, there is a verse, you're probably familiar with this verse, Akama sarva karma va moksha kamardardi tivrena bhakti yogena tajeta purusham param. Person who has broader intelligence, whether it be full of all material desire, without any desire, desire liberation, must by all means worship the supreme whole, the personality of Godhead. So it seems a little contradictory to emphasize a thing like dovetailing your desires. I mean, why is that in our philosophy? I mean, some gurus say one thing like that, and then other gurus like Bhaktisiddhanta, he'll say this. He spoke to a person in a gulag in India during World War II. He said, on the second day after my arrival here, my Gurudev told me, quote, the first thing you have to do is to collect all that you've learned, read, excerpted, felt, know, put it in a big bag and throw it into the sea where the sea is deepest and start anew. And I was trying to explain that because it's so profound to me in our Kirtan Center here in Pittsburgh. And some people couldn't understand it. What do you mean, throw away everything I've known? You know, it seems to be too much for them. But why do some of our teachers say you can dovetail your desires and others not? I mean, it seems like a waste of time if you actually understand the principle of surrender. Yeah, you're just delaying your own, ultimate surrender.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing this up because I think this is probably what's on the mind of many of us, because sometimes we hear these strong statements of just like, let it go. And then we also hear, of dovetailing, and Prabhupada definitely emphasized so much in the Bhagavad-Gita. We're full of desires and we do have this very strong identification. And it's almost like, what I was emphasizing today is like another angle of looking at our situation. But it can't be just dropped, right? We can't just let it all go. We do have certain inclinations, and the inclinations themselves are fine, but it's the personal ambition or selfish desire that's behind it that has to start to come out of it. So dovetailing is the method because, okay, I'm full of these desires, and maybe it's mixed in with just my own pride. Maybe, I want to do this service because I feel good about this ability that I have, and I kind of feel a certain, I congratulate myself in some way, and then people appreciate it, and okay, but we should still also understand how strong we have this selfishness. So I'll go on, and I'm connecting it to the Lord now. Krishna, please, we do it with a prayer in the heart. Krishna, please, perhaps I'm doing this in a mixed way. I can see that actually. But I still want you to accept whatever good is there, whatever service is being done, just accept that. And even though I'm still taking it for myself in some way, allow me to overcome that. And that's why this other angle of just, what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, and Prabhupada often would speak strongly in this way too. It's important for us to continue to hear that, so that we can see that within the dovetailing, within the connecting of my desires to Krishna's desires, we can still see where we want to go with it. That eventually we may do the exact same things, those things that we like to do for Krishna. Those don't have to go away, but something inside of it has to be pulled out, which is the ownership, that it's mine. This is my thing. This is my, doing it for my reasons. And so Prabhupada definitely, he saw, with disciples and so many devotees, the mode of passion, the mind is so strong. Therefore, just engage everything in Krishna's service and having faith that gradually we continue on with all the different services, but internally a change is taking place. Internally, we're seeing that, it's not about me at all, actually. This is what it means to surrender. It's to surrender my own selfish intention within these activities. I want to let go of that. And Krishna, I want it actually to be all for you, just for your pleasure. And so it makes sense that both are emphasized at times, this, complete letting go and also the dovetailing, because, it is, we understand these things philosophically, but we're still very much, what comes out of the heart is still these strong personal motivations. And so what do we do with that? Well, we continue to chant, mention, like I was mentioning, seeing that also how this is the process, these are coming up, and let me start to let go of them. And we also use all of our abilities, talents, and knowledge in the service of the Lord. We just want to let go of the identification of it being for my benefit. I hope something there was helpful, but it was a great question, and definitely worth really thinking about and figuring out why that seeming contradiction is there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good answer. But I just found for myself that when I completely let go of my own desires, even to preach in this way or that way, I find that there's so much less anxiety. I'm not doing anything anymore. Really, Krishna is doing everything. Just like Ramananda Roy was answering Lord Chaitanya's questions, but he knew that wasn't his own answers. It was Lord Chaitanya who was speaking through him. So
yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just a mode of not having to worry about doing this thing that way or that way, just accepting the impulses from the Krishna in the heart or from the spiritual master without. And then you're free to do whatever you want, basically. If you just hold on to that path, Guru and Krishna, like two rails on a train.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Even with our chanting, it was like the same thing. We think I'm going to sit down now and chant. But I always like that Satchidananda Swami would sometimes say, you're not chanting the name is chanting you. So it's like you're doing this action. You have to make a commitment. You have to decide to sit down and chant. And it seems like it's all you, but there's a way of chanting in which where it begins to flow and you realize that Krishna is dancing on your tongue. You're not doing anything. You're just a surrendered soul, and Krishna now is appearing. He's the chanting. His name is manifesting. So I think that's a nice, it gives the same example of what we're sharing on the scale in the area of chanting the holy name, how it seems like an activity I'm going to go do and accomplish. And maybe I'm doing it for even in that, I can have some personal motive, in chanting. But at the same time, there's a way of chanting where it shifts, where you're still chanting, you're still doing something without really doing it, but Krishna's doing it through you.
Yeah, that's excellent. I just remember there's a thing that I read yesterday in the Shikshamrita, Chaitanya Shikshamrita, and Bhaktivinoda says there's only two things. I appreciate your emphasis on the holy name because that's everything. Bhaktivinoda says there's only two things in Lord Chaitanya's instructions: the feeling the holy name, or the realization of the holy name, and mercy to the jivas. That's it. That's all there is. And when you realize that on that platform of complete surrender, then you're on the way. There's nothing further to be understood.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have time for another comment. Hare Krishna, Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for such a sweet, wonderful class, brother. I'm still new to the movement, and I just wanted to say two things that stood out for me. Was identification. I grew up in a strong Italian family, so saying I'm Italian and then you hear my accent and you go, excuse me, were you born in Brooklyn? I mean, were you raised in? My cat is asking for food. So anyway, so that's one. And the second thing was keeping myself busy. I thought, chanting the holy name, Hare Krishna, the Maha Mantra. When I first got involved, I said, what does that mean? What is Hare Krishna? What does the Maha Mantra mean? So I looked it up, and there was a YouTube video of one of, I don't know if it was a guru, but they said the Maha Mantra means, "Oh, divine Supreme Lord Krishna, engage me in devotional service." And I said, wow. I said, so every time I'm chanting the holy name, I'm doing the Maha Mantra, I'm asking Krishna to engage me in devotional service. So it's like in the Bible, it says faith without works is dead. We could chant the holy name, but what are we doing? Shh. So I'm thinking, when I was listening to your class, I was thinking, okay, faith without works is dead. So when I help with food distribution, I notice that the thoughts, all those bad thoughts, those thoughts that I want to get rid of, they're gone.
Mm.
When I'm engaged in devotional service and feeding the homeless with Aripurusha and the rest of the interfaith community, it's amazing. It's a wonderful feeling. It's indescribable. So I just want to thank you again. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Such a good point you're making. That's what's supposed to happen by the service. It's meant to be an absorption, and then we kind of forget about ourselves, and we're just nicely serving Krishna. And we're remembering this is service to Krishna. That's what's exactly meant to happen. And it's a distracted mind. Sometimes even in service, it takes us away from what we're doing and why. But if you're able to, serve in such a way where you're actually becoming more connected through the service, that's the power of the service. So that's a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing that. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hare Krishna, Ghanashyam Prabhu, Dandavat Pranams.
Hare Krishna.
Really wonderful class as always. Thank you. I have two questions and one kind of leads into the other. I'm just curious, you mentioned the holy name is really kind of in every spiritual tradition. And you mentioned for Islam, the Sufis, but this is more a comment too, that, I think my understanding is the Sufis, I'm not sure if they're like considered by, say, the Sunnis or the Shias as like a true Islam, because I guess they had some influence from Bhakti. But if you kind of look at the other major sects, really, the majority I think are Sunni. They're really all about the 5 prayers, and so are the Shia. And because the chanting of the holy name, whether they have their beads and like the 99 names of Allah, it's not the prescribed way. And there's so much about preservation, and praying the 5 prayers is the prescribed way, and it's done by the Prophet. And if they're like the youngest religion, or kind of like the newest revelation, like the end all now, the God's like last word, this is the way versus chanting any holy name. That's kind of my first question, but that leads into this concept of, today you talked a lot about transmigration, and if you take a step back and we think about, and there's been some discussions too among some people in the devotee community, but if we say God is truth and God is unlimited, then the truth is unlimited, and so therefore there are many truths. Reincarnation is very heavily emphasized, and we can say we have the unabridged version. So reincarnation is a truth that happens, and the Abrahamic religions just don't get into that. But if you say their scripture is also truth, right? And even say the Quran, that it's been perfectly preserved. There's no talk about reincarnation. It really is God blowing the soul into the body, and everyone waits till the day of judgment. There's just this one day of judgment, right? That you kind of go, up or down, kind of like paradise, hell. There is no talk of that. It's this and even say with Adam and Eve, right? We say, oh, it's an allegory, but for them, you can literally trace back, like person by person, all the way back to Adam and Eve. So that's kind of their evidence. So you go, okay, well, the reconciliation is just, there are many truths. But so to this concept of reincarnation and what your consciousness, and depending on your consciousness, you're attracted to a certain path. I mean, is it that it's almost like we decided to take the hard way? Like, we have to perfect our lives. Like, we need to be kind of perfect, and we're going to have like millions and millions of attempts. And we like took this path that is like the long windy way, whereas like God gave this like super easy way, like oh my gosh, it's here. Like, say, I don't know, for Christianity it's like you accept Jesus as your savior, and then for Islam, if you are even just like a few steps closer towards God, Allah, you can make it to paradise. And if you do your 5 prayers, it's almost like you guaranteed. I mean, even with like whatever mind that you have, like they say, well, then Allah is more merciful than Krishna. Like, it's kind of like this, we are attracted to Krishna who doesn't accept me. It's like it's so particular, and this path is so I'm gonna say hard. It's like even the chanting, right? Like my mind is everywhere. As much as I try, like it's like, well, you have to perfect your chanting. Like it's so hard. Whereas for them, it's like Allah is all merciful. Like even if you're a few steps, like you can make it. Like so Allah is just like I don't want to say it's like a different God, but it's we just it's like so easily, if your goal is 2, they just go 1 + 1 = 2. We're like taking integrals and derivatives and like this really hard way. I'm curious your thoughts around that, because for them it's like you take to this path, you're getting to paradise, which is the spiritual world, and that's our assumption. Like it's so easy, it's kind of so easy, and for us it's so hard. Yes. So thank
Yeah,
you.
well, it's I was hearing a class by Prabhupada, or a walk actually, like a morning walk, I think. And he was asking his disciples, what is Krishna consciousness? And they were giving different answers, and Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness means that Krishna's the master and you're the servant. That's all. If you can embrace that, that is Krishna consciousness. So it is very simple, but we also have so much information to help us become simplified in a sense, right? It really is about, this surrender to the Lord, returning to the position of a servant rather than trying to be the master. We can also sum it up very simple. Sambandha Gyan doesn't have to be very complicated. It's actually very simple. It's understanding, well, what's this material world? Why is it here? What's my relationship with God? Who is God? Just these few things. There's an energy called Maya that's covering the living being. Understanding these few things. That's why very simple people, if you go to India also, in villages, or there's just simple, ordinary people, they may have, they're pure devotees there, and they're not exactly, studying so many things, and they're not like technically into the technicalities of the philosophy, but they understand the essence, and they actually have devotion, true devotion and love for the Lord. So all the other information that's there, somebody may have a mind like that, where they need, if they may have a scientific mind, and then we also can satisfy them. If they have a scientific mind, we can explain the science completely. If you don't have a scientific mind, there's also a place for you to become a pure devotee. If you simply have faith in the chanting of the holy name, and you begin to chant, and realizations are coming from that. So yeah, in terms of that, sometimes it doesn't have to be difficult, but so much is there for so many kinds of people to satisfy them within Krishna consciousness. Within the Vedic scriptures, they're so vast, they contain so much. And so there's something for anybody, whatever angle you come from. There's an opportunity to get your answers, to get your questions answered. And so that's a great thing. And, a lot of that science is lost in other traditions, but they may still have some essential points, like, surrendering, you go to the guru, Jesus, this total surrender and faith and trust and following. And then there's good results from that. Sometimes these other traditions can make it too simple, or take away the necessity of, in other words, some people say, well, just by saying that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, now I'm saved, done. Just speak that way and it's done. Right. So we can see, obviously, there's sentimentalism that has also come into all, different traditions, and it's been made almost just automatic by a statement, and so we understand, okay, yes, we want to say that, we want to enter into that, we want to really enter into that consciousness. And so Krishna consciousness is wonderful, because it has so much for everybody, whatever our minds are like. It's all available. And anyway, those are just some thoughts on that point. You also mentioned Islam. So I went to Egypt and saw also how many of the Muslims there, they had beads, and they were chanting. And I asked a man what he was chanting, and he told me this, La ilaha illallah, just repeating the name of Allah. And so this, yes, usually it's going to be a controversy within all the different traditions. But it's always found there. You find some tradition of the chanting of the name. And because, again, there's no parampara system, or it's been broken, then people come later, many years past, and people, what is that thing of just chanting? You know, it says in the Bible, you should not repeatedly, vainly and repeatedly offer prayers. And so that's sometimes connected to the idea of chanting, but yet you find still this tradition there, especially in the Orthodox Christian world, of the repetition. So yeah, it's usually the devotional sects that still do it. Like you mentioned, the Sufis are not accepted by Orthodox Islam. Yeah, that's always going to be there. There's always the same with the Buddhists. There's a devotional sect of Buddhism which chants the name of Amitabha, the Amitabha Buddha. They actually repeat that name, and other Buddhists will say, "Oh, they're not bona fide." So that's always going to be there, that somebody else is not bona fide. But if you look deeply into all the traditions, you do see that the tradition of chanting the name. So that's all. We're a little bit over. We should probably stop. Ananda Bihari Prabhu.
Yeah, Ghanashyam Prabhu, thank you very much. Very beautiful class. I really like the fisherman analogy. Like I said in the comments, I thought I was the fisherman out here. I thought it was all for me and about me. But actually, Krishna is very carefully working in my life and baiting me and putting me in the association of other devotees like your good self, like everybody in this class. So thank you very much, Ghanashyam Prabhu. We love you. And thank you everyone for participating in this class. Have a wonderful day and let Krishna do the work. Let Krishna do the work. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.